Welcome to True House Stories. I am Lenny Fontana coming out of New York City. Well, we're now in the Christmas season to cheer and give. So I've been scouring the earth for the women in our business. And I believe this is the most important part. We need to hear more of the women. I know it's a male-dominated industry, and the women that have been able to keep it going and teach us along the way is one that I'm going to bring up just in one moment. She's a powerhouse. And here's the craziest part. Can you imagine when you have a hit record out back in the beginning of your career, and it's a pop record, and a famous show at the time called Living Color takes your actual video and makes, kind of a comedy routine out of it. That's when you have now stepped into like icon level. Crazy, right? Like when they did with MC Hammer, when they did that funny thing with his pants and everything on those shows. But we all admire her dearly. She's a force to be reckoned with. She's been in this game for decades. And of course, I'm going to bring up right now the one and only Crystal Waters.
Hi, Lenny. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. We are so happy to have you and can't thank you enough. We've been talking for months about this.
Oh, yeah.
We scheduled this stuff 9-10 months to get to these. And she also said to me, this is her last interview.
It's the last one.
So she's going to shut the water off after this. Water's going to be shut down.
The well is dry.
So first, before I ask any questions, how you doing? Everything good? Is everything
good? Everything's good. Everything's flowing. I actually enjoyed being home. I've been on the road for 30 years. So it's actually nice to be home and, get a nice schedule going, getting some things done.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're healthy, and I'm glad, again, along the way with this horrible C word, we've lost a lot of great people.
Yeah.
And we were saying off camera before, we just don't know how many more we may lose, but we have to enjoy each day as our last, we should say at this point. But enough of that morbid nonsense. Think about it, but it's around us. But so because I know you have a lot to tell us. I always ask this first question, and I'm going to give you the microphone, and you could roll.
All right.
Basically, how does music find the young child, Crystal Waters? Because we know you're an adult. We know the story after the videos and all that great stuff. We want to know how you get from the young one to where you step in the biz, as Crystal Waters.
The young Crystal Waters was very shy. I used to always sit in my bedroom with my headphones on, listen to the Jackson 5. Loved music. My father was a jazz musician, and he toured. So every summer I would go with my father, Junior Waters. He actually had a little minor hit in the 60s, My Life is a Seven, and actually got to appear on American Bandstand. So I tell people, I didn't realize it, but I guess I've been on the road since I was 8 because I'm an expert packer. I can pack a suitcase. But yeah, so I spent, my life around that. There was always rehearsals at the house. My brother was in a band. My sister sang and played piano. My uncle Zach was Zach Zachary, who was the lead saxophonist for MSFB and TSOP. So Love is the Message and Diana Ross, Touch Me in the Morning. If you heard the saxophone on that, you heard my uncle right there. Gamble and Huff were friends of the family. I remember Teddy Pendergrass being around. So in hindsight, I guess it makes all sense. But at the time, I didn't realize it because, you're always regulated to your room and, you really couldn't hang out with the adults. But since I was such an introvert, I think I loved to write, and I would always write poems. And my sister had a typewriter, one of those big old typewriters, and I just wanted to do that. So I would spend time, typing. I would, record songs off the radio and figure out the lyrics. And I would make I would walk to the store and get the teen magazines and make up music magazines of my own. So that's really kind of what my childhood was like.
So you say that, you had all this talent coming into the house because your mom was friends with a lot of these people, and of course your uncle and your dad.
Mm-hmm.
And your imagination of you making these teen beat. So you actually did have a destiny of where you were going to see something go. I kind of see it clearly now.
It's nice to see in hindsight, but at the time, I thought I was too shy. I always wanted to go to a performing arts school, but that didn't happen. At the time, I had, the choice was to go to New York or to Howard at Washington, D.C. And, without, should have went to New York maybe, but I don't know. I ended up going to Howard. But I think, I remember telling those stories too when I was at work. And this is when one of my coworkers, when I didn't know what to do with my career next, I was working in the computer room at the Parole Board. And he kept saying, you love music. Why don't you do something with music? I was like, what? Why? What? And that's when he said he had a cousin with a studio and was looking for background singers. And it wasn't until then that the light bulb went off.
How long were you actually a parole officer before this moment happened?
I wasn't a parole officer. I did issue warrants in the computer room.
I'm sorry.
And there was only one computer in the whole building, and that was the one I knew how. I went to Howard University for computer science, so that was the one that I knew how to work. I think I was there maybe a year, because I remember I got signed in 1987, but I sat until 91. But I was happy that I was signed to a major label. It was so long that the people at the Parole Board thought I was lying. They didn't think I really had a deal. They were like, when's the record coming out? When's the record coming out? But so I was there a good year or two before Gypsy came out.
So in 87, when this was signed, who was the people behind that record and the production that you did?
It was the Basin Boys.
It was Basin Boys at that time.
Yeah, I signed to them as a songwriter. And you want me to tell that story? How I met the Basement Boys. I guess
you may have to tell it. Yes.
Yeah, let me rewind a little bit. So I was at the Parole Board working for the DC government. And I got to, if you ever work for the government, there's a list that comes around that tells you how much you're going to make every year, G4, G5. And I was like, it's going to take me 10 years to make some money. And that's when I got invited to do this background singing. And I got in the studio and the light bulb went off. This is what I wanted to do. And I was hanging around the studio and I realized no one else was going to, help me to get into this business, especially as a female. Anyway, men and females in the studio. I'll let you picture that. So I just knew the one thing I knew I could do was write. I knew I could write. So I put an ad in the local city paper looking for keyboardists to co-write songs with, because there was a music section at the back of the paper where people would get together. And I met this guy and we got along great. And we did a demo. I was doing more of a Sade type of voice, sound. And there was a music conference in Washington, D.C. I don't remember the name of it at the time. And we didn't have any money to go, but I had this demo. My father paid for the demo. I went to Philadelphia. We got the demo made. And we ended up sneaking in the back door it was like in a hotel, like the Marriott or something. We broke in the back door. We snuck in and didn't know their names, these guys with these really nice leather jackets on. It said Basement Boys across the back, had a little patch. And I was like, give it to him. It was Teddy. I said, give him the demo. And, that was it. I maybe handed out another demo to maybe one or two other people because everybody was leaving. And I got home and the phone rang and it was Teddy Douglas. And he was like, I love your stuff. I love the way you write. We want you to write for us. And I was like, yeah, sure. And, he said, they did, I don't know if he actually told me what type of music, but it was dance music, which was really new especially here in DC. Maybe you heard it late night, maybe in the club. It was more of a confunction sound at the time, a little bit more funkier dance sound. So I said, long as I can write, do me over the beat. I don't care. And he said, that's what we want. We want some real songs over these beats. And that's how we met. And they sent me a bunch of tracks. And I remember I rented a 4-track. And the first 2 songs I wrote was Gypsy Woman and Making Happy. And so I had to, I had a 4-track to get it together. And then I just remember driving up to Baltimore and singing them. I mean, I didn't have the ability to record and, go up there and sing. I just remember singing Gypsy, and Teddy just kind of fell out the chair. So
Stop! I can hear him going, stop! Everybody knows Teddy Douglas. He's real animated.
Yeah. He married Mama. He was.
That's what we all love about Teddy, because he's so animated. You like,
yeah, it was great.
You like it? You like it?
Yeah. So that was it. And at the time, the microphone was in the bathroom. It was in Jay's basement. That's why they're the basement boys. And the microphone was in the bathroom with padding, and they had the studio in the room behind it. So that's how that started. We recorded those songs, and I had some of the Sade stuff on there, and they shopped it. And so they shopped, and I guess it got signed at A&M in London at first. And that's where it sat until, I guess, 90, when Bruce Carbone came in from Mercury Records, who was the sister company to A&M, and brought it over to New York. I think Tony Humphries was playing it, and Bruce Carbone heard it in the club or whatever, or on BLS, and went after it.
I can remember exactly how it went, because we all had tapes of it.
Cassettes.
And some of us had reel-to-reels of it, and we were running it. Remember, Tony Humphries was playing it on Kiss Master Mix 2 nights for a while, and people were looking for this record. And then eventually, I guess it was already Steve Wolf, I presume, signed it, and Wolfie over in A&M, because that's where he would have signed it first. And then I think it was in the assistant, and Bruce Carbone grabbed it.
Mm-hmm.
And then next thing you knew, here we are talking about your first.
I had no idea that was going on, that it was being played in New York. I was just going to work every day, and I had no idea until they called me, like, I don't know, February of 91 and said you had a hit. And I was like, okay.
What do you mean a hit? Like, what?
I didn't know what that meant at all. I thought they met in Baltimore and DC. I had no idea who Tony Humphrey was and what the whole scene was in New York, even or Chicago. Clueless.
Well, is that because you have more jazz background? Is that where you're listening to at the time? Or is that just a matter of being totally going to work every day and just living day-to-day life, basically?
Well, I was in college, and only time, from college to working. So anytime I went out was in the clubs, and I wasn't, the radio stations were playing R&B. And the only time you heard dance music here was if you were in the club late. And like I said, maybe on the ride home from the club, would you hear, we called it dance music, and it was kind of, there was no name for it at the time. It was just that stuff they played late at night. So
late night sound, a late night sound. Right.
I wasn't really in the clubs, in New York, hanging out in the clubs. So I didn't really know that whole scene until Gypsy Woman came out.
Okay.
And that's when they took me to New York, and I went to the Sound Factory bar with Junior Vasquez, and they said, you gotta sit on the speakers. And I remember hearing a story about Madonna sitting on those speakers and how I just thought that was so awesome. And I got to see the whole scene. They played Gypsy Woman. I felt it through the speakers. I remember seeing all the dancers and the drag queens, and, they had the circle and people dancing in the middle. They still had the baby powder going. And so that's when I really kind of got indoctrinated into the club scene in New York. And, a lot of the gay community took me in, and I learned a lot about makeup, performance, emoting, and just hanging out with all those people. That's when the real life change came, and me being part of, house music, dance music scene.
So Basic Boys give you baptism with fire, bring you to the debauchery.
They just threw me in.
Throw her right in the fire den. Sodom and Gomorrah. Watch the fan dance. all in.
Uh, it was like, what? People do what?
Yeah, exactly. Because if you've never seen that, that's like I call that the life-changing experience.
It is to see that.
Instantaneous, right?
And people love it. That's a man. What is that in a dress? What?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No. So it was. I got thrown in. I had sink or swim at that point. But I loved it because I was so, like I said, I was so shy, and I always never felt like I really fit in most places. So when you got to New York, I got to that scene, and everybody was individual, and didn't give a hoot about what anybody else thought about it. That kind of gave me my self-confidence, to be me and not be afraid just to be me. So yeah, it was life-changing, but it was really, I want to say a homecoming, but like like feeling, welcome, a part of something.
Now this must be the moment as this record is exploding, because I remember it like yesterday as exploding, because it was a changing of sound. It was one of the first of this genre to go pop, because everybody that understands pop music is anything that's popular. So you're taking a 4/4 sound that's reminiscent of disco, but it's not disco. It's an organ-driven track with your sound on it. You're changing the game like instantaneously. I remember it was like 1 minute it was one way, and now musical. No, because before that it wasn't musical. It was more drummy, more linear sounding the records. And now here we come with this bum, 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 Hammond organ, a straight chord progression, straight up, and your voice, which is different than anyone else.
Yeah, I remember they had me in the R&B department the first time I came up. I went back home and came back. They were like, nope, we're switching over, hand over to the pop. I was like, okay, so I do something. And I think, since I had that jazz voice as opposed to maybe the gospel or R&B voice, I think it was a lot of, and with so many mixes, one of them is orchestrated, it's full strings and everything. And they had that, and they went to the Strip to the Bone mix, which was deep club mix. So, looking back at it, I can see how, it was a game changer.
And you're not even realizing you're living it. See, that's right. You're like the goldfish inside. Now you're inside the system. But you got to explain to me, because people don't really understand when we say hit, gold record. They don't really get this. They don't understand what that means, how much work now you're going to do. For example, Top of the Pops or American Bandstand at the time, or whatever's, your life goes from you work a 9-to-5 job, and now all of a sudden you're going to Michael Jackson and Madonna status, like a snap.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was hard. I was just talking to an ex of mine. We were talking about how I would be so tired. You go from, you're doing free shows, you're doing interviews. Interviews would last from like 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. This is like one after another, photo shoots. We used to do at least 3 shows a night. Back then there was a club on every corner. It was me, CNC Music Factory. 3 shows a night, like Wednesday through Sunday. So it was the daytime was full and the nighttime. And then you're traveling overseas. And back then they had the Concorde, and they would fly me over to Paris and then back to do the Palladium that night. Things like that. And then into choreography. Diane Martell, who a lot of people I work with are so famous now. Diane Martell did the first choreography. Then we had Jamil Graves. And then we did the videos, Marcus Nispel. And it was never like, it was always like, just come now. It was never like a schedule, like we're going to do the video next week. It was just, we need, because it hit, and I think it took off so fast, nobody was ready. So it was like one thing after another. And then there was no album. I wasn't around to do an album. So the Basement Boys had to basically go take all my demos, which were Sade type songs, remix them into dance tracks, basically, and use whatever demo vocal they had. Because I couldn't go back in, because a lot of these songs were written for other people. I was signed as a songwriter to write for other artists on their label. So there wasn't any real like backgrounds or any harmonies. So they had to take whatever demo I had left and create songs out of them and try to make them sound good. There was no auto tune and stuff back then. So that first album, when I got back from London, I had an album and I had nothing to do with the album. So it was a shock. There was just a lot going on. And actually I kept my job for the first year and a half because I didn't want to lose my health care. I didn't get it. I didn't know that this was going to be the rest of my life. You know, it's my first time having a passport. And so I stayed at the job. I took a leave of absence, but I still kept the job as long as I could.
But let's be real for a second. You just said something really interesting. You just got a passport. Your whole vision is changing. You're becoming more worldly too as you're traveling, because I've learned this too. There was no school like being on the road. You know that. On the road, your way of being right or wrong. You know,
on the road is like dragging through dirt. You just got to keep going.
Assimilating with the people that you're going to. You got to sit and have dinners. You got to deal with this. You got to deal with that. It's not
politics of the. Yeah, I was with Mercury at the time where they would have etiquette classes. They would try to teach you a little bit how, especially, they knew I was shy, how to speak to people, And I have to also say that the education I had with my father being on the road, one thing he always taught me was always accept a gift. If they ask you want some water, yes, because that's the way people, converse. And, he also taught me that, especially overseas at the time, I might be the only Black person they ever meet. So I would represent every Black person to that person. So I had to make sure that I represented the whole community. So that was always in my head. At least I had that, in my head. But, in hindsight, traveling is the best part now for me. I love meeting the people. You got to do the dinners. You got to talk to people you've never met from different cultures, different accents, things you don't understand, So, that is a hard thing to learn. But once you get it, it's very enlightening.
But I remember you also saying as well, let's clarify something. You were on the road real young too.
Mm-hmm.
Dad, right? As well.
Yeah.
So you didn't. What years was that? Like teenage years, or people?
I was like 7 or 8. I started traveling. My brother and sister went, but around 10 or 11, I started going by myself. They were too. They didn't want to do it anymore. But I would just sit and watch him. He was the kind of person that could talk to everybody, and it was he would do small tent. Back then, the Holiday Inns were the big thing, so they always had a lounge. So he would play lounge. He'd play all the jazz standards, and you go into town. A lot of places we were only Black people in town, so everybody knew who he was, and he'd have to talk to everybody just as gracious. And at night, I would sit with him while he would do his sets, and he would come over, have dinner. Then I didn't have a cell phone. I don't know what I was doing. I was probably in my head. And I would sit and wait until it was time, after a second set, he would take me back to the hotel and go back and do his last set. But that's when I would dig into his crates. It was all jazz stuff. And Ella Fitzgerald's like one of my favorite singers because she always had that up tempo stuff. So yeah, I kind of knew a little bit about the road.
So you're so like I said, so you're one step ahead, where a lot of people who talk about jumping into this from a regular day job, this is like, oh my God, crash course. So at least you had, some sort of preparation. Even if
I see people who don't know how to handle the road, who don't know how to deal with situations, and they kind of shoot themselves in the foot. And I've seen people with a lot of talent that did not know how to handle the road or how to deal with the politics of the business. And they just disappear. They just don't want to do it anymore. Or they just shoot themselves in the foot and never get another chance. So yeah, I always say, if you wonder where somebody went, it's probably more of the politics or the way they handled themselves as opposed to the talent.
Yep. So now that you are Crystal Waters, the pop star, at that time, and you come back and hear this album, where does things start to change for you?
Yeah, I came back. I was kind of upset about the album.
Why?
I would have put more focus in it. I would have re-sang a lot of the vocals. I think the Basin Boys did a good job. They did the best they could. But it's, at the time, that was my baby. My songwriting is what, my passion. I don't know. I think it did for me. Once I realized that this, I had to come up with another hit. The second album.
That's the next question. What's the pecking order? So we're
everybody, first of all, at the time, everybody said dance music was a phase. It was going to last. It's just a fad. People were asking me, when are you going to do real music? She's just a one-hit wonder. I had all that, we had all that on our heads, and the pressure, and, even my family, like, when are you going to do, some jazz music, some real stuff? So, we got beat up pretty good. It made a lot of money, but we got beat up pretty good because they, mainstream didn't know what house music was. It was just developing, and it was just coming into its full, fruition. So the next album, we knew we had to come up with something big, something. So that's when I really kind of put my teeth into it. And I wanted to make sure that storyteller was, everything I wanted an album to be. So that's when we really, got together. It was stressful. Did
you have the A&R people telling you, well, we needed to be like another Gypsy? Yes, I know you were shaking, because we all heard that. As soon as you have that first diabolical hit, they want everything to be de facto exactly the same way. Like the Robin S. Love, Show Me Love. I want another record just like that. I can just hear them telling you, Teddy, Basic Boys, and you, Crystal, we want another She's Homeless. Man, what do you do? What do you do?
We rolled our eyes. Well, it's a lot of pressure. We write these songs. And I remember I did write a song, which I thought it was called Daddy Do, which is another controversial topic. And this is what I was doing at the time. And when we handed it in, they were like, oh, you can't sing about that. You can't talk about that. I'm like, well, Gypsy Woman was about a homeless, situation. And, so thank God you weren't over my shoulder when I wrote Gypsy, because it would have never came out. So, yeah, I just remember, getting the tracks, trying to find it. I just remember getting 100%. And it was just the bass line and the drum. I like really simple stuff. And I just knew that was it. And I wrote it. And the first hook was the beat goes boom. And I was all excited. I took it up to the Basin Boys, and they kind of laughed me. They laughed me out of the studio. They were like, go home, mama, and try that again. But there was a lot of pressure. And it was a lot of pressure on the Basin Boys, for production wise. You got to remember, Quincy Jones had written them a letter saying how wonderful they were. And, and they would, it was a lot going. It was very stressful, but we got some good people in there to work with us. And we pulled it together, and Bruce sat on our butts, making sure we had at least the one hit song on the album. And then we did get to do a little bit of experimenting on the album, but it was a lot of pressure.
So when you delivered it to Bruce, now, did they look at this and say, we're going to put it to the pop side of Mercury, or we're going to put this to the R&B side? Like, how are they going to handle you now? Because you're defining yourself as an artist too. And all these things are changing. And dance is the bastard child, as they say. So
it was the
bastard child. So let's take the dance word out, and let's talk about where you're going to be and who you're working with to make this second album really cook, Well,
after Gypsy blew up, I think they started signing other dance artists. So there was other people. David Morales was on Mercury, a couple other artists. So it was more acceptable. They wanted to strike gold again. Mainstream radio was playing dance music. So, it wasn't just me by the time the second album came around. So it was easy to fit. I was right back into the pop side. But there was a lot more hands-on to Bruce coming, yes and no, and send that back and do this. Even the contract took 3 years. If you notice, Gypsy was 91, 100% came out in 94. It was a lot of it was a lot of drama. But yeah, there's a lot of hands-on from the label. But I think in the end, it's my favorite album. I think it came out pretty good. I was very proud of that album.
You should be. It's an excellent album. It's got great songs on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great album.
Yeah.
When you say drama,
Hmm?
when you say the word drama, there's a lot of drama going on. Are you talking legal drama or just a lot of interlocking with the horns? People just egos. What kind of drama were you dealing with at that time? With the success at the same time.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was the label wanting things. It was us wanting things. It was dealing with fame and money. I'm not going to tell the basement boys story, but they have a story that they can tell if they want to tell about it. I wanted more things in my contract. They didn't want to give up, so it was that negotiation back and forth. And at the time, that's just how the lawyers acted. I had a big time lawyer that just sucked up all my money. You know what I mean? And they just took forever. They call themselves positioning themselves, and they wouldn't answer a phone call. I'm like, the album's ready, it's sitting. So it was a lot of it. Was illegal. It was personalities. It was fame. I don't know if Basic Boys knew how hard I was really working, how many free shows I did to get Gypsy Woman to where it was, and how many people I had to please. Because they were successful. They were still in the studio creating. They were working with big time names, people at this time. And when I was out on the road, I was really busting my ass. And
that's why I asked you when you said about drama, because nobody knows this. The only people
and I was going through a divorce. I forgot about that.
Please search for part 2 of this podcast on the platform you're watching or listening to. And please do not forget to follow us.